before there was maybe video games and drones and all these other ways to see it. I do think that there's still something to be said about the dedication to learning how to fly and being up there afterwards. It's darn sure pretty cool.
Sheridan, Harvey, welcome. It's really cool to have somebody from a foreign state, all the way from Colorado, coming into little McMinnville and wanting to join our community for a little while to become a pilot, a helicopter pilot of all things. It's cool to have you on today. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me.
You got started before you came here. What were you doing exactly before you came here?
I initially got into flying capture work, which is not your typical job, and very few people know it exists. But back into high school when I was 13 or 14, I worked for the Game and Fish office, and we did a lot of capture work with the animals, as far as putting collars on them and tracking their habits, and a lot of my job was to go out and get these collars. They'll last from, depending on the study, or anywhere from 6 months to 2 years before the battery dies on the collar, and then it falls off of the animal. And so at that point in time, my job was to go find the collars that had typically fallen off after a period of time and collect the data. Obviously, there's a lot of money in the collars, so you want to get those back and then strap a new battery on them, reconstruct the collar, and pretty much just looking at data at that point in time. So I did it as an internship in high school. And more than anything, it got me out of a little school, and so I was fine with doing it. And so one day in the winter there, they let me go along when they were actually catching all these elk, and I never seen that part of elk and deer and whatever the animals were, but I never seen that aspect of it. I just picked up the collars after they'd fallen off, and always had a curiosity for how they were putting them on. And that's kind of where I got my first close interaction with these helicopters, and I watched them catch them, and so my gears kind of changed at that point, from wanting to work for the CPW to wanting to be in that helicopter catching them. And so I started nagging them at that age. Way back then, if there was ever an opportunity to get in the helicopter, it was sure cool to be on the ground, but I wanted to be in that thing and be in the action. And so then, honestly, I forgot all about it. I guess 7 or 8 years had passed, and I'd moved on to my ranching career, and had done that, went to school for it, went to college in Wyoming, and had moved back and got the job that I kind of figured was my career job, managing a place there and running cows. And just one random winter day, my old boss from 7 years ago that I'd stayed friends with called me up and said that the mugger, which is what I was, it's the guy that sits in the back of the helicopter and jumps on the animals after you net them, had got kicked in the face and broke his nose, and he couldn't see out of his eyes. His eyes were full and shut, so they needed a mugger the next day. And so, I obviously didn't turn that down. I asked him what time to be there the next morning, and probably still the craziest experience maybe of my life, just jumping in one the next day, and not much of a tutorial. I mean, I'm not really a guy that loves directions anyway, but I could have used probably a little more the next day. But we went out, and I had, the time of my life for 2 days there. I guess it was just a weekend, and honestly thought that was probably just going to be, the coolest couple days of my life, and I'd move on and never do it again. And then, crazy how, God works, and he kind of lined some things up, and I ended up wanting to see what else was out there, and that just never left my mind, how cool that was. And I hadn't made up my mind yet. And then my new boss that owns the capture company ended up calling me up out of the blue and asked if I wanted to do it full time that next year. And so I jumped on that, and then I was a full-time mugger. So I sat in the back all year of a MD-500, which is kind of a smaller type helicopter, but still, you see them a lot on the movies and stuff, still very agile and a cool one to sit in the back of, and got to kind of fall in love with them through that, the places it took me that winter, and the animals that we caught. And I've always been a wildlife advocate and loved animals. So the things that we did with the helicopters and the places it took me really made me fall in love with them. So at the completion of that season, because it ends as the temperatures start getting warmer, you can't catch the animals anymore. So at the end of that season, I decided that I was gonna go learn how to fly them, and that's kind of where the real journey began.
Wow, that's really interesting. I did not know any of that. You showed me some footage one time of maybe somebody else flying to get in on some of that wildlife. Uh, and I can't remember if you were the one taking that footage or you just had it from someone else, but that looked wild and crazy and scary. And you were doing that at the age of 13, 14, 15?
So at 13, 14, 15, I was more so on the ground. I wasn't in the back, but I definitely got to see a lot of it happening. And then they a lot of times, depending on the study, they'll sling these animals, so they'll put them in a basket and bring them back to a tent where you can, see if they're pregnant or whatever the study might be, see their back fat, see how they're doing in the that winter or whatever the study might be. And so I always saw those helicopters bring them back in, and then I was, like I said, I was just kind of on the ground working it that way. But I never actually got the first day I've ever gotten a helicopter was that day 7 years later when I went out and actually just jumped right into the kitchen. Yep.
That is just so cool. You just sort of fell into it in a sense, but you might have seen it happening around you, and all of a sudden you had an opportunity come to you. Really cool. So now I'm just going to jump into some of the interesting aspects of it. That to me, part of your training, and you train others as part of your training is night flight. What exactly does that feel like, or at least what was it like when you first had to try it, and now you're trying to teach others to do the same thing? What's it like flying at night?
Yeah, it's kind of I've had some family ask that, and it's kind of hard to explain, but it's crazy peaceful. There's not many people on the radio, um, not much going on up in the sky, and you can't see much below you except for lights. So you're kind of just maybe comparable to driving a super dark road for a long ways, but it's pretty peaceful, and you can sure if you fly over a city or something, and it's breathtaking in its own way to see the civilization and all the lights on. It kind of just looks like its own little Christmas light show, I guess.
So do you have an altimeter to tell you that you're getting too close to something, or a map, or is it just luck or wits?
No, no, they have all kinds of instruments in them. Altimeters are standard day or night. We have to have those. So you keep good track of what's the altitude on the ground, and then we have an altimeter telling us what we're at. And obviously you find the difference and we call that AGL, that's above ground level. We keep that AGL altitude, try to keep it about 1,500 to 2,000 feet above the ground at all times, just to keep us clear of towers and maybe obstacles that we didn't catch in pre-flight. But most of the risk management comes before we ever get in the air. You don't want to be realizing that there's a mountain or a tower while you're in the air and having to make a quick decision, because sometimes you make the wrong one. So we try to spend, if we're going to fly for 3 hours, we spend all day planning for that trip, especially at night, and that's where you can mitigate a lot of the risk.
Hmm. So what about weather and rain? Does that mess you up quite a bit? Dust devils or sudden gusts?
Well, part of your training, I guess a third of it was what they call instrument training, and that's teaching your body to. We have a somatosensory system, a vestibular system, and then your visual system. And as long as you have all three of those, it's not too hard for your brain to figure out, kind of your orientation of where you are. And but as soon as you take that visual system away, which is what happens in a dust storm, or hence this instrument flying in a cloud or any of those scenarios, it's I always tell like my students and stuff, it's like standing on one leg and it's pretty easy to balance there looking at the wall. You close your eyes and you're usually kids within 5 seconds fall over. That's because we that fast our visual system's gone, and you lose track. um Same deal with, closing your eyes and spinning in circles. You're super quickly become disoriented to where you are. So all that instrument training is teaching your your body and your eyes mainly to trust the instruments. So we still have that visual, but we can't see outside. So now we have to put all of our trust in these instruments that we have in the instrument panel in front of us, and trust them enough to we get all kinds of our somatosensory and our vestibular systems are telling us all kinds of wrong senses, and that's what oftentimes you hear about, especially helicopters, but planes too, getting in what we call IMC, which is inadvertent meteorological conditions. And anyway, they get in these conditions and can't get out of them. And so what you want to do is be able to trust your instruments and figure out that some of those, signals that maybe we're getting from our other systems aren't exactly accurate.
Wow. Very cool. What were there any surprises when you first got going that you didn't expect as part of this?
Yeah, I didn't realize quite how much went into it, I guess, and just the farther I get along in my training, it still amazes me how every single day, if not every single hour that I'm flying, I'm learning something, that I didn't know about these things before. And I feel like you learn the basics and you get muscle memory down. And that's, you think you can fly, and you can safely get off the ground and get back to the ground and do what you need to do to fly around in the sky, but that's maybe 10% of it. And so to fully understand the machine and learn how to work it and not overexert the engines, especially when you get into turbines and bigger helicopters, is that other 90%. And that part is every day. It seems like I learn something about what these machines like and what they don't, and how to manipulate them and make them do what you want to, safely.
Well, and when you showed me some of the parts of the engine when I went out to the airport, you knew a ton of stuff about it, like it was the back of your hand, like you'd been doing it a long time. I was pretty impressed, and it's nice to know you're still learning, and each engine is kind of like driving different cars and vehicles, give you different feedback when you're driving them. So yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
You came all the way here from Colorado. What made you choose Jerry Trimble Helicopters? He's legendary, I've heard.
Well, I think I just heard the name enough times that I I eventually, it was always in the back of my head, but I wanted to stay closer to home originally, and so I found a school in Utah, and got my private license, which is just the first license that you get. Got it done there, but just wasn't necessarily satisfied with my experience, and more so needed to go somewhere else. For the next part of my training. And so it would, it kept popping into my mind as days had gone on with that other training. And I knew that I would be disappointed if I didn't at least see what all the hype was about. And so I called here, and from the very first time I called, they were overly generous. And actually, I didn't even have a great plan the first day I called, and they let me just pull a camper out here and stay at their house for all summer last year when I was doing my training. And they're just really good people, down to earth people. Feels more like a family than a school, and they do really good job training students also, which is the cherry on top.
How long have you actually been flying, and how much longer do you have to go before you're done?
Well, it's kind of an open-ended question because I don't know what done will be, but I started riding in helicopters. I guess started kind of my career in helicopters about 3 years ago, but I didn't start flying them until early last year, February, I guess. And didn't get to McMinnville until about May of last year, and stayed here. I guess I've been here since about then. I left for seasonal job last winter, and then got back again in February again. But as far as my time in McMinnville, that probably won't last too much longer. As far as where the flight instruction is, that's just kind of the way it is. It's kind of a temporary deal, but as far as when I'm done learning, I think that probably goes on forever.
So you're like a forever student, just trying to keep things
Forever
up and
student.
going. Is that
Yeah.
kind of how it works? What did you think you were going to be doing, and are you still headed that direction?
Yeah. Good question. Um, a long time ago, I feel like when you're a little kid and you see a helicopter fly over, it's just instinct almost to want to be up there flying it. And so from a young age, I had interest in it, but at that point, it was mainly, I figured that all those helicopters flying above were some kind of military. It seemed like some kind of military operation was the only way to get into it. And so very young, it was military. And then that interest kind of changed. Um, I just kind of switched gears there, and not that it wouldn't still be super cool, but they don't do as quite as much flying as I was hoping they would. And so, like I said, what really got me into it was this capture work, and so that's what I by the time I guess I was old enough to actually start training, that's what really got me into it was catching wildlife or cows or wild horses or whatever it may be um, with these helicopters is what got me started, and 100% that's still my end goal. The only part that has changed is that now I've realized, now that I know how to, I wouldn't say know how to fly, but at least I'm starting to learn how to fly them, how much talent goes into that capture stuff. I think, this is just a compliment to those guys that I have been working with. I really think that as far as what, now that I've been in the industry a little bit, I really do think it's got to be, if not the hardest, one of the hardest piloting jobs that there is out there. So what I thought was going to be me come and get us, my certificates in 6 months and go back to catching, I've quickly realized is that's a ways out. I gotta get a lot of experience under my belt before I'd even be comfortable trying it, let alone being able to do it. And so along the way, I've kind of loosened up on what I'll do along the way, and I'm not super picky about that. I would like to probably touch on maybe some fire stuff at some point, and firefighting that way, and maybe some ag stuff along the way too.
When you took off between sessions last year and this year, you did seasonal work. Was any of that helicopter, or are you able to do any of that yet? Or are you still needing to do more before you can be hired out to do a job?
Yeah, last year was I worked for that same company doing the capture work, so still the exact same stuff. I
Okay.
got to qualified to
You weren't flying, or you were flying?
I qualified to ferry the helicopter. They call it ferrying, moving it from A to B, straight lines. That's kind of what I was good for last year. So the rest of the time I was shooting the net gun or jumping out. But um, as far as that goes, that's kind of how you get your time early on, is just transporting the helicopter and then let the real helicopter pilots fly it around and do the job. And then obviously since then the instruction has been where I built most of my time.
So where are you going to have to go next to be ready to do that amazingly difficult job?
Yeah, there's no set in stone answer, I don't think. There's a lot of that kind of work that I'm interested in Texas. There's a lot of it in Australia, just because there's a lot of animals that they're catching, especially in Texas. Yeah, in Texas, there's a lot of exotics that they're netting. Plus, anywhere that you can get experience catching, gathering cows. I shouldn't say catching, but gathering like domestic cows is super useful. Low level flying, and they do a lot of that in Texas. Not so much back home, but like I said,
Okay, so you don't have to go to a school and take more
no, sir,
classes and
no.
study and pass tests. You just have to start experiencing it with various people.
Yeah, pretty much the days of as far as licenses and regulations in school, those days are kind of behind me for the most part, but now it's, kind of the real life learning from other people and more specific kinds of flying.
Overall, what does a cyclic do? What does a collective do? And when do you most use each, or do they mostly work together?
They're all kind of tied together. The easy way to think about it is the collective. The collective is my up and down. That's my elevator. If I pull it up, we're gonna go up. Pulls more pitch in the blades. If we push it down, we're gonna go down. When I do that, there's also a throttle on the tip of that controls throttle to the engine. If I add throttle, I got to add anti-torque, which is my tail rotor, and I control that with pedals. So pedals are tied to that, directly tied to how much I pull the collective, and that's my up and down. And then my cyclic is your steering wheel.
It's super strange looking steering device because it seems to be sitting in the center, but you're sitting on the side, so it's almost like you have to grab one end of it. Is that true, or can you grab it
That is
with
true.
both hands?
They call that a T-bar cyclic, and that's specific to the kind of helicopter, the Robinsons that I'm flying right now, and that's mainly because they're made for a trainer. That's just so I can give it to the student, or the student can give it to me, and it teeters right there in the middle. As you get into other helicopters, those will be more like, I guess it'd make a little more sense. They come up with a right between your legs, and it feels more just like a joystick that would sit between your legs.
Did you know that you were going to have to train others when you first arrived at Trimble?
I knew that it was a way that a lot of people get hours. honestly, at the very beginning of my training, I didn't realize how crucial it was to becoming a good pilot, like I believe it is now. And so I wanted to skip that step. I thought, kind of, I guess just selfishly, I thought that I'd be able to skip that step and go right into directly what I wanted to do. And, I think that that's probably been one of the main things that I've learned is how good it is. I mean, now I would highly recommend it to anybody because you kind of concrete in all those ideas that you thought you learned and you didn't have before. And so I'm grateful that I am doing it now because I do think it's important. But initially, no, I didn't think I'd do it.
When you first started being instructed, is there a piece of advice that your instructor gave you that you still kind of think about or hang on to every time you fly?
Yeah, I think that um, I had a bunch of really good instructors, but um, one that was just kind of real practical, I guess, with what he said. And he told me a lot that there's never been one that's gone up in the sky that hasn't came down. And kind of said it in a jokingly way, but getting them off the ground is just the beginning. That's they always come down. It's just how you get them down. So um, basically, that always sticks with me because you have to I guess never get complacent, and you do have to realize that there is a danger to being up there. There's a lot of super super cool experiences that come with it, but you do have to realize that you're a long ways up there in the sky, and if something goes wrong, it's going to go or could go very wrong. So I think just staying kind of humble in a way about that, and not getting complacent with what you're doing. A lot of that, like we talked about earlier, comes in flight planning and risk assessment and just making the good decisions while you're up there. But that one's really stuck with me because every day could be, you know, the best flight of your life or the worst. So making sure it's the best is important.
Beginning with the end in mind and not being a hot rodder is kind of what it sounds like you're saying to me there.
Right. Yeah.
Be very respectful of it all.
Yeah.
It kind of seems like there's a social life that might happen off hours. Is there some of that happening once in a while?
There is. Yeah. I mean, the aviation world, not just helicopter, but, um, and I don't think it might be exaggerated even at Jerry Trimble just because they do such a good job of leading it. But from what I've seen in the whole aviation world, it's a pretty close knit, small world um, that brings people from all over. But we all have one thing in common, and so we like being in the sky. And so kind of going to any airport that I've ever been to, you'll find a group of people that's done it most of their life, and there's always, it seems like, a group of old retired pilots that are hanging around there and are willing to share their knowledge with you, and then a group of younger guys that are eager to learn, and that's why they're there. And then there's the workforce that are coming through, and it's always been cool to me to see that part because there's no two people here that are really came from the same walk of life, but we're all here and we all get along pretty darn good.
When I was out there, I wasn't sure if there was a tower because it seemed like people were just kind of doing their own thing. But there's something that looks like a tower nearby at the McMinnville airport. But then you told me there is no tower, so I was like, okay, how do people not run into each other? Like when there's a big jet coming in, or
Trust your radio and trust your training across the board with communication. Communication is a huge part of keeping everybody safe when there's not a tower for obvious reasons. But um, there's a lot of common sense that has to go into it. You can't just trust that the next guy's going to miss you. You both got to do something to stay out of each other's way, and it's also just, yeah, as long as everybody's communicating, we should be able to hear and communicate where we are, and that'll keep us out of being in that situation. But um, Jerry always likes to say, it's safer than driving to work on the road, and it really should be in theory if everybody's kind of doing their part. There's nowhere that's necking us down like on a road where there's that many people. That's the sky's a pretty big place, and in theory there should be plenty of room for us to go around each other, and as long as everybody's doing their job.
that's a good point.
Yep.
When you took your first solo trip, like an hour or two, what's a typical route from McMinnville in a nutshell?
To start out with, you stay real local. I mean, you're staying right here by the airport, not going more than half a mile to a mile away. and then as you get a little more comfortable, you can venture out, but stay right here in the, not going farther than Sheridan or Independence or Salem. Um, and then part of the training is cross countries, and really once you get into the cross countries, we try to not go much farther than, as far as at least those younger pilots, private pilots and solo pilots, going no farther than Corvallis or maybe Eugene, back around to Salem, and try to stay away from going north for the most part. Keep them in. There's a lot of meadows and hay fields around here that keep you pretty safe if something bad ever did happen.
Well, that reminds me, you described, and maybe I've got it in the video I took out there about. I guess maybe I'll just use what you said there, but it was very interesting how the helicopter has a means of staying afloat if the engine stops to some extent.
Yeah,
What's the name of that again?
we have what we call a Sprague clutch, which is a freewheeling unit that disengages the drive shaft from the engine, essentially. Um, we have a crankshaft that comes out and spins a lower bearing and then goes to an upper bearing with V belts, and it'll disengage the drive shaft more or less. So all it's doing is in the case of a full on engine seize or those belts breaking or something like that, we can disengage our rotor system from the engine so that, contrary to popular belief, we still glide. We just don't glide quite as far as a plane. So at that point now our rotors are being spun by air coming from underneath them, and they still spin it just as fast as they were going before. We're just we need to find a place to land that's fairly close.
I considered whether or not I'd ever want to go up in helicopter, and I really don't, but I might be convinced now that I've been a little closer to the action and seeing it's not all that bad. And but is there anything you do to try to help? I know if I had to be on one, I'd be talking to Jesus a lot, all the way up and all the way back. But anything you do to stay calm or focused?
Yeah, I mean, quite a while ago, I don't know about staying focused. I just, have to continuously remind yourself that there is a lot of moving parts there, and you do got to keep yourself pretty vigilant. But as far as staying calm, I've never had too much of an issue with that. And I've talked to some other pilots recently that do some work that's fairly dangerous, and they kind of came to terms with it a long time ago, and I like the way they put it. But as long as you do have a pretty steady base on your religion, I do think that there's a time and a place that he's going to call you home, and in theory, that's decided long before I decided to fly helicopters. So I do think that, I have a lot of trust in him, and even though, some people say it's a pretty dangerous occupation, I think that that's all you can kind of put it all in perspective with a steady foundation.
Amen. Well, has learning to fly a helicopter changed the way you see the world, like physically or philosophically or literally? Has anything changed since you've been up? Of course, you've been doing it for quite a while, but so maybe that question doesn't necessarily apply. But you kind of getting a different perspective on things from up there, other than the obvious,
Yeah,
you're up in the air.
I kind of thought about the similarities because I get a lot of funny looks when I say I went from, a rancher to a hunting guide to a helicopter pilot. There's not a ton of similarities, and I kind of couldn't figure it out myself, and I spent a little time thinking about it. And I think it's the fact that all three of those lead me to places that are, you know, God's creations that not everybody gets to see, and that's always interests me is the places that, are over the next mountain, or what's past there, what haven't we seen, what's past the edge of town, and hunting and riding horses, moving cows is both have got me that satisfaction, but nothing like, you can imagine if you're in a helicopter, there's hardly any place that you can't go check out, and quickly too. So I think it's keeps me keeps me humbled and grounded, and it darn sure makes you realize the God's creations that are out there that some people aren't fortunate enough to get to see. But I think that if everybody could, they'd have a hard time not believing.
Yeah, no kidding. I think Romans 1 talks about that a little bit. So, related to that, if you could take a dream trip that you haven't done yet anywhere in the world, is there something you'd just love to see
Yeah,
from your helicopter?
that's a good question. I don't know if there's any specific place. Um, I'm pretty biased to just my hometown and in
Colorado.
Colorado. So if I could go anywhere just with the wildlife and the terrain that we have there, and um, just kind of my love for that country, I think I'd just spend the rest of my time flying around there, because I think I could spend the rest of my life flying around there and not see it all.
Well, amen. It's beautiful from all the things I've seen. I'd love to see it someday. Haven't been yet, but you got the Rockies and you got everything in a sense, except the ocean.
Yep.
So I can see why you would be happy. Same with Oregon. There's a lot of things to see in Oregon that
Yeah.
I would love to see. So it's beautiful here too. Would you encourage others to do what you're doing, or
Yeah.
do you recommend not going into it?
Oh, absolutely. I think everybody should ride one at least once in their life to see if they like it. And just with my time here, I don't know that I've ever taken somebody, even if they're didn't love flying a plane and they didn't like the helicopter. It's got a big old glass bubble and you can see everything, and you're just, it's kind of like living life two-dimensional, and then all of a sudden you get to see it three-dimensional. So I sure would recommend it. I think that there's something special about just the infatuation with being in the sky, and I think that a while back, years ago, before there was maybe video games and drones and all these other ways to see it, there was more of an interest to get up there and to see it. And I do think that there's still something to be said about the dedication to learning how to fly and being up there afterwards. It's darn sure pretty cool.
Sheridan, thank you so much. God bless you on your next steps in locally and in life. And it's been a pleasure getting to know you.
Yeah, no, the pleasure's all mine, and God bless you as well.
Thank you. Now receive it.
All right.
Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter's silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds, and done 100 things you have not dreamed of, wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air, up, up, the long, delirious, burning blue. I've topped the wind-swept heights with easy grace, where never lark or ever eagle flew. And while with silent, lifting mind I've trod the high, untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God. I'll just get some stuff.
Where the propeller would go on an airplane is our fan scroll. So just put it in there backwards and then catch it on its way out, and it goes into that from the lower sheave to the upper sheave. It has a clutch actuator, tightens those belts. That spins our drive shaft. So you have a speed decreasing gearbox up front, and then it goes back to that tail rotor gearbox, and there's a speed increasing gearbox back there. This still in here is called a spray clutch, and that'll disengage our drive shaft from the engine, from the crankshaft, if there were to be like your engine were to seize up, or if there's a problem with these belts or anything like that. That way the drive shaft can still be spun by air. That's what they call an auto rotation. This is like same as a bike, we call it a freewheeling unit. So it allows it to spin one way but disengage so that the engine seizes. Our rotors can still spin around, and then as we're falling through the air, the wind spins the rotors and keeps us afloat, so we glide back to the earth safely, in theory. This entire piece. So usually if you talk about like mass bumping, it shears it off, right? Curiosity, but this is our collective. This right here, these in the middle, there's two of them. So that collectively changes the pitch in our blade. So that's what's actually grabbing more or less air, and this is like our, more or less our gas. So that's where they get the name collected, because it's collected down. And then on the tip of these, we have a throttle. So there's a mechanical linkage that as it comes up, that's called a correlator, and that mechanically pulls some throttle, and then we have a hand throttle that'll open and close the rest of the throttle to keep them spinning. This has a governor on it, so it has an electrical governor in there that keeps those RPMs at 104%, so right in the green for us. And then we have a cyclic, and the cyclic just this is our steering wheel, so it just changes pitch in those blades. If we watch that deal at the 3 and the 9 o'clock on that, what we call the swash plate. So that's our steering wheel, and then obviously we have a bunch of torque in the rotor system, so we have to combat that with our tail rotor, which is an anti-torque system. And we can't change how fast that spins, but we change how much bite it has on the air by pushing our pedals. So you'll just see that pitch get changed in the tail rotor, and then move these. So left pedal is more anti-torque. So that's more pitch in those blades, it grabs more air. And the right pedal takes pitch out. That much forward puts you in low G and cuts your tail off, like what everybody thought happened to that one in New York. So, I mean, all of our movements, you can do as tight a circle as you want with that. That would be a very, very sharp turn. This would be, you know, bring you to a complete stop. Nose way forward. Now you can get a little more aggressive with the collective, but these movements are typically within a half an inch. This is the one that everybody struggles with to start with.
I'm gonna be on the pilot side. That's the right side here. I'm almost a month in. It's well, they're just throwing more stuff at me now.
Sure.
So it's like you figure something out, and then they're like, oh, let me give you this problem now. So we use 100 low end, and we just make sure it's blue.